Yeah,
Okay.
perfect. And so I think you want to expand it to full screen,
Yes, I sure do.
wherever that is.
Got it?
Ah, there she is.
There she is. With
Okay.
with just me.
Uh-huh.
If anyone wants to join me, can click the video.
Okay.
Thank you so much. So let me just press recording, and Jane, you can start. Let me just press recording.
Okay. Got it.
Got it.
Welcome to my talk on Artemisia. She was certainly a powerful woman, and Zach likes to call this powerful women. I like to call it scandalous queens. She wasn't a queen, she was definitely a woman, oh boy, in the world of art during her lifetime. Her paintings have recently been most enthusiastically rediscovered, though they have always hung on the walls of major museums throughout the world, both for their own merits and as an example of what a strong and talented woman could accomplish despite injustice and personal tragedy. If she had lived another 370 years, she would be very old, but she would have enjoyed the blockbuster exhibit of her work mounted by the National Gallery in London in October of 2020, complete with videos acted out and everything about her life. A condensed version is on YouTube. At least 2 historical novels about her have been published in the last few years. Before giving you her story, here is a sample of her work, which actually this isn't. This is a portrait by Simone Vouet, and I put it here because somehow portraits can be realer than self-portraits. But let us continue and see if, there we go. And this one is a portrait of her by herself. There is nothing static about this. The Vouet is a formal portrait. Her arm just seems caught in the second of painting. And you can notice the intensity of her gaze on what she's doing. Though actually, for some people, that might not be the first thing that catches the eye. Yes, Artemisia's work is unapologetically sensual. Artemisia seldom had church commission, and perhaps the next slide will show why, both by choice of subject, and we go ahead. And this is actually, doesn't that guy look really lecherous? Yes, he does. And by the way, I love comments. If anybody has anything to say, because I am not an art historian, so I just love to hear the other opinions.
Yeah. Well, Jane, just one thing is, I don't know how at that time, technically, you could achieve the lighting that's here. You need a rather bright theater light, spotlight to do this. You can't just have a candle off on the side of the room.
I have no idea how it was done.
Well,
And
I think
it may be possible that the portraits were painted. They wouldn't always pose the models the way they're posed. The general rule was that you took the models separately when you could get them, and you did the portrait in the pose that they would have. And then you put the 3 of them together. And I don't know the techniques that would be used to make the lighting happen. Maybe someone does.
Well, I think what you're getting at, Larry, I'm not sure, is that she's actually envisioning the light because she could not have technically created it, right?
Yeah, I don't think it would be possible until the 19th century to create.
So the vision is hers alone, and Caravaggio did something similar, yes.
Yeah, and also if it were firelight or candlelight, it would be diffuse in comparison, and
Yes.
also it would have an orange tone.
So this is literally her mind's eye of the light.
Yeah, she's imagining this light, or
Yes.
imaging this light for us.
Which
know-
was pretty revolutionary.
Yeah.
I'm just back from Greece and suddenly struck by how difficult it is to make yet an Egypt, to make 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional things that look like what they're supposed to be, like human beings that you can recognize.
Mhm.
And it was lost for so long. So with this added, it makes it even harder, I must say.
Mhm.
And I really love the way the light is shining on the two women, and the only part of the man that gets any part of that is the, below the knees, basically, the knees and below.
Well, there may be a reason for that. Can you guess who the person is in the middle?
Yes,
You probably know, but go ahead.
it's Lot and his 2 daughters getting him drunk.
Of course.
Yes. Okay, well,
Shame on
this-
them.
yeah, this is the way it is. I mean, and this is not, it's from the Bible, but it's not a very nice subject, right?
Yes, it's not one that the men would have glorified. Yes, who
Yeah.
got the church commissions. Yes, I agree.
Not for church commission. And the next one is, can you guess this one?
Hmm.
It's actually a saint,
Oh,
Mary Magdalene.
Magdalene.
all right, the Magdalene.
Yes,
It is the Magdalene, yeah?
yep, it is.
Wow.
Yes, and it's from the private collection of a cardinal, but he didn't hang it in church. And you can kind of see why. Now, if we go on, the sensuality is definitely in both these pictures. There's even a little sensuality in her painting of the banana and child, which I will go to.
Mm.
And look at that. Isn't the baby adorable? He's so adorable that I can imagine a whole convent of nuns folding their habits very carefully in a drawer and rushing out into the world so they can get a baby just like that one.
Also, though, look at how much flesh on the Madonna figure. I mean, that is very atypical.
Yes, it is extremely. And this is one reason why she didn't get church commissions.
Mhm.
And so now she painted this when she was 20 years of age. And it's, as I said, it belonged to a cardinal, but it also got sold quite recently for over 2 million GBP, which is about 2.5 million USD.
Mhm.
And now let's go on one more.
I
And yes.
mean, that baby is too big.
Mhm.
Oh,
No, it's a
which one? The one before?
in the Renaissance that male painters didn't know how to paint babies, and so they paint them like little adults.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
That's what
Yeah.
people want. Well, these are the proportions of the baby, but I think it's about 50% too big for its shape.
It's hard to remember those days, to tell you the truth.
Well, imagine that baby standing up. So
They
you can-
stretch down.
now this baby is fine.
Well, thank you. I wouldn't have noticed that.
Yeah.
Anyway, this one is by her dad, Orazio Gentileschi,
Mhm.
who was eminently successful in his time.
Jane, can you
And-
flip back to the previous slide for 1 second?
Sure.
Because we're talking about the babies, and yeah, that's what I was thinking when that one was up there, was how atypical that is too of the time, because it looks like a Breck baby. You know what I mean? It looks like a very modern depiction of a baby, not a Renaissance era depiction of a baby Jesus, who would have looked like a little man. Yes.
Yes. And he's not holding a goldfinch either. Okay, let's continue. Then there's that one. And everything in this one, you see is discreetly covered up. And now the blue, there's no hair. Well, he does have a halo. And the shawl is blue, which is a little darker than the usual virgin shawl color. And it might be any mother with child.
Yeah, but the baby's genitals are exposed. It's not, that's not covered up.
Oh, yes, I see it is. I guess that was okay.
In case you're wondering, he's circumcised.
But of course.
A good Jewish baby.
Yeah. Artemisia Gentileschi was born in 1593, and she kind of disappeared in the 1650s. Nobody is quite sure of the year of her death, and it was put down to 1650, and then they came up with portraits that she had painted in 1652. So either she was alive or somebody forged it. So we don't really know when she died. She was Orazio's first child, and she was followed by 3 brothers. Her mother died when she was 7 years old. Her mother's name was Prudencia. And here is a picture of Orazio. And there's no record I could find of how he got the injured arm, but the expression on his face suggested it wasn't tennis elbow. The Roman art scene was pretty violent in those days. Baglioni, a rival painter calumnied by Orazio and Caravaggio, characterized Orazio as more bestial than human in a revenge file. Artemisia and her brothers were taught their father's trade and became painters also. The brothers' paintings are totally forgotten. Orazio Gentileschi's work, by contrast, is on view in the Louvre, at the National Gallery in London, at the Getty Museum, the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., among many other venues throughout the world. And here is his take on, I believe, Noah. Let me go here. And that's his take, I think, on Noah, right? And over here, we see the bottle, which is the allusion to Noah's drunkenness. But notice he just looks exhausted. And they are kind of protecting him in a way, but pointing to the new world to come and the new population. It's much more politically correct. And we'll leave that up for a second. And maybe we will go on to.
Look at the 2 different, the way
Wait, I'll get it back.
women
Okay.
are depicted, though. There's completely different suggestion of, one seems very protective, the other one seems almost wanton.
Well, the incest had probably happened, and that's probably what he's tired from.
Well, yeah, the suggestion of a dichotomy between the 2 possibilities. It just sort of jumps out at you.
Yes, maybe he didn't have enough energy for 2 sessions.
Or it could be expressing Artemisia's feelings about, I mean, a lot of women I know are uncomfortable with this story, to be perfectly honest with you.
Yeah, except this is Orazio's painting, not hers.
Okay. Interesting. So maybe he was uncomfortable with the whole idea.
Well, he knew what would sell and what wouldn't. She was young and naive. Okay.
Well, I think also, these paintings have fixed symbols, and
Yes.
the dress off of the shoulder is probably, you could just write courtesan that next to that in your decoding guide to Renaissance paintings.
Right, and that high on the thigh.
Yeah, also, and you saw that in the Madeleine as well.
Yeah.
She had one shoulder uncovered to represent her previous life.
And then the same thing with the Noah figure. I mean, there's clearly that suggestion of should we or shouldn't we kind of thing. I mean, he's in a state of deshabille in the lower half, but he's exhausted and covered in the upper half. Yeah.
Yeah. And anything pertinent is also covered, which is, I guess, a good thing. If you
Just
want to.
barely though, Jane.
Really?
Jane, just so that we historically put this on the map. This did, and maybe this sounds not very intelligent, but did Renaissance come to Italy basically later than it came to Netherlands and Dutch, or this is kind of happening at the same time? What or the Renaissance would be a stretched notion for a couple of centuries, so to speak.
Italy is the first. Italy is the first where Renaissance came from. It came into Italy. That's the first country, as far as I know.
Right,
What do you think?
but if you looked at painting, you have the Northern School. You have people like Van Eyck,
Mhm.
Campen, and Van de Weyde, and they're contemporary with Masaccio in Florence. So it's very beautiful that one place is specializing in creating beautiful materials, and they have no sense of perspective because it wasn't important to them. Whereas mathematical perspective is being invented in Florence the same decade. It's a very interesting dichotomy.
Thank you.
Oh, and the two were
But
connected by,
Larry,
there were major trade routes running north and south from Florence to Bruges in London.
but wouldn't you say, Larry, that the Renaissance, that's what I think, but maybe I'm wrong, the Renaissance really started in Italy. If you not necessarily in painting.
Yeah.
But, I mean,
I think one reason for that though, Greg, is that the church and Italy had the money to pay these painters. And that's why a lot of them migrated there, or like were able to be recognized sooner because they were getting the quote unquote Christian doctrine painting commissions.
Yeah.
Well, there was, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that besides paintings, if we talk about like Dante or Boccaccio, I mean, this is already Renaissance. This is before that.
Well, that would be a slightly earlier. There was an earlier,
Right.
but
You're not just in painting, but the Renaissance is moving.
right. In painting, I think the two were roughly parallel, and there were good trade routes between them. So they were sharing things like technical innovations very, very often. But if you looked at things like recovery of classical documents and translation of Greek and exposure to Greek from Byzantium, then Italy was way, way ahead of the rest of Europe.
I also wanted to say that the Flemish, the tapestry making areas were very, very rich at that time. And there was an incredible flowering of art at that time also.
Right. Like you may know the Arnolfini wedding in the National Gallery, the two people that look like they're betrothed or something, and nobody actually knows. But the people in that portrait were Italian, although it was painted in Flanders.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's basically a family from Lucca.
Yes.
So the trade routes back and forth meant that there were no secrets in painting.
Uh-huh.
If a new technique was invented in the North, it ended up in the South. But I think painting, maybe the North was a little bit earlier than.
Yes, about 100 years.
If you look at one mark of the Renaissance is the revival of humanistic scholarship and the devotion to the classics, the recovery of manuscripts, and Italy was way, way ahead.
Would literacy have been part of that issue, Larry?
Well, these would be the people that would be reading Greek and Latin. So I think, it wouldn't be literacy for the common man.
That's what I mean. Yeah. So that might have been why that was more concentrated in Italy versus the northern areas. Whereas painting is more a physical thing, but doesn't require the same engagement as literary fluency.
Yeah. Ooh.
Now, just to go on for a minute, This one, because you mentioned it's the dialogue and the geographic expansion of the dialogue. This particular slide is from a ceiling, and it's one of a series commissioned for the Queen's House in Greenwich, England.
Wow.
This kind of thing, it's standard interior decoration at the period. This one's called An Allegory of Peace and the Arts, and it was painted by both Orazio and Artemisia, who were employed in London, and this is in Greenwich to be precise. And it was done in 1638, and the Queen was Henrietta Marie, and she would be in 10 years the widow of Charles I, who lost his head at that point.
Yeah.
And she was working alongside her father there. They were both official painters in King Charles' court. The London years were probably the happiest years that Artemisia ever knew.
So do you know what the date is on this painting? On the
1638.
ceiling? 1538?
Well, it was installed in 1638. They might have
16.
painted it a year or two before. Now, how
It
did
was painted and then installed? Is that what you mean?
I think I'm not sure. I mean, it's not like Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel.
No, but the perspective issue is, it's in many ways similar to what was going on in the Renaissance ceilings, but it's not as elaborate because those tended to have a lot of various dimensions in the actual architecture. This one seems more on a flat surface, but I can't tell for sure. But the perspective is really great.
Yeah, I have no idea if it was made on a flat surface and then put up, but I don't think they painted it on the ceiling from word go. But I could be wrong, who knows? Anyhow, so we're going to how did they end up there? And, I mean, it must have been wildly profitable. And let's take a detour. They were in the most well-paid work of their life and the steadiest work until Cromwell made a mess of it. Was it because they were great artists that they got the job, or because of their prestige, like wearing a dress by Gucci or Alexander McQueen? Well, I'm not the person to tell you what makes great art. And you can go and read about it in about 500 books, and they all disagree. But, I can't talk about what sells. It helps to be on the crest of a new wave. I mean, think of Impressionism or Surrealism. And art, of course, goes out of style from time to time. Like, for example, we now sneer at the classicism of the French academicians, even though the Met made a kind of weak attempt to sort of exhibit them, get interest. It didn't last. An interesting backstory about the artist helps. I mean, there's a literal backstory about the Sistine Chapel, which we were just referring to. And there's Gauguin chasing paradise in Polynesia. And an individual recognizable style is important. I mean, Giotto's faces don't look like anything that came before. And nobody but Andy Warhol painted soup cans. I mean, if you're going to spend millions of dollars on a painting, you really want people to know what they're looking at and the probable cost.
Yeah.
The Gentileschi checked all the boxes. As for the New Wave thing, the art in fashion in the late 16th century was, Larry, Mannerism, which emphasized emotion even to the point of distortion. The most famous and extreme cases belonging to one. Anybody guess?
Yes.
El Greco, for those who might not, who
Oh,
died in
Here's a
1640.
trick question. What nationality did he have?
I believe he painted all the time in Spanish, in Spain. But
In Spanish.
Britain, maybe.
And his name is El Greco.
no, I
It
know.
says from Crete.
No, hold on. He was born in Greece, but he was painting in Spain.
Right, the
He
Greek.
was
Right.
The famous the Frick collection has a lot of his stuff, and they talk about his history. That's why they call him El Greco, because he's Greek.
Yes.
Yeah, but he was born on the island of Crete,
And that made him Venetian.
right?
Oh my
At
God.
that time,
of
yeah, that's
course.
right. Yes.
Yeah, and if you look
Technical
closely,
details.
if you look at the fabrics and the cloth, and now go look at Tintoretto.
Yeah,
Huh.
yeah. There is colors.
The
Yeah,
cloth is
there are some colors that are similar.
Yeah.
Well, that was the style at the time with the Mannerism.
Well, I think the Noah portrait, the second one, with the three very intense colors of the two dresses and Noah in blue, would have been a little piece of a Pontormo painting.
Okay.
And the figures are awkwardly arranged in the same way that you might find in Mannerism. With, Noah has basically passed out in his daughter's lap.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
But I think he's also was influenced by the icons of the Byzantine style icon in his painting.
It's possible too.
Because-
Yeah, I can see that.
Because I've seen the Byzantine icons, and I certainly can see the similarity,
Mm-hmm.
and especially in Crete, they have a lot of.
Yes, exactly.
The major questions I have is, how come the iconoclasty never made it to the western part of the world, only stayed with Byzantium, and therefore depicting of Jesus was kind of forbidden at some point. And, go
I
ahead.
think it did reach Northern Europe. There were pilgrimages of iconoclasts that went from church to church and town to town, all through Flanders and Germany. And it's been said they destroyed 90% of the art that would otherwise have been available to us.
Right. The only reason we have Hagia Sophia is because of the Mehmet's stepmom, or one of the actually was Slavic, and out of respect to her, he just plastered over the icons, and
Is that where the term comes from, iconoclast?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, for heaven's sake, I never thought of that.
It was a religious movement to purify religion in Byzantium.
Well, I knew there was a religious overtone, but I never associated it with the icons of the painting. Do you see what I'm saying? Yeah.
But it was the same belief that that they generalized verses in the Old Testament and thought that it meant you could not represent animals or God or anything like that.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
Graven images.
And the one group of Protestants accepted that whole framework, and they went around smashing church icons.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
Well, go into a church in the Netherlands and notice the beautiful white walls and the clear glass windows. That wasn't the way it was built. It was covered with pictures of saints, and there were stained glass windows.
But this is like one of those red letter days, because I just got a brilliant flash of insight. Thank you so much.
Well, I would also like to quote Martin Luther, who said, "If I have Jesus in my heart, why can I not have him in my eye?"
Oh, very nice.
Yes.
Yeah.
And continuing, so not all Protestants were that way. Okay. I think they were after saints more than they were after pictures of saints, perhaps, in their mind.
But I
Exactly.
think what you're going toward, Larry, are like the Calvinist groups, right?
I think that, I'm not sure who they were, but the place where they really hit hard was Flanders. And so a painting like the very famous Adoration of the Lamb, the incredibly big triptych.
Oh, yes.
Figures, that only survived because people smuggled it out of the church and hid it.
Yeah, I think that was part of that really rigid fatalistic Calvinism, I think.
Yeah.
I'm not positive, but it seems very typical of that whole movement.
I think it's very likely, particularly given the location.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I should go on a little bit. 'Cause I
Yeah.
think
Sorry, Jane. You shouldn't have invited us.
Oh, no, please keep it up. But from time to time, I have to move a bit.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is, of course, you asked for it, right,
Hmm.
Larry? It's Caravaggio, right?
Yes, but somebody else gets the job. Okay.
What?
Yeah, and just see, I don't, like this lighting also is imaginary.
Yes, it would have to be. If the other one was, it would have to be.
You need a spotlight, a very intense one, to do this.
Yeah. And it's amazing how they could.
Yeah.
Okay, for those people who might have no idea what I'm talking about, and there aren't any here, there's minimal distortion. The most obvious innovation is the extreme contrast in lighting. The subjects are engaged in doing something dramatic. There is a strong sense of motion. The artist who painted this picture was Michelangelo de Caravaggio, considered to be the master of chiaroscuro technique, the use of light and dark in strong contrast to intensify the emotional content of the painting.
Mm-hmm.
And so we continue. Come on.
Oh, Noah, you're right. Yeah.
Okay, let me.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
What's the thing?
All right.
And then we will continue. Here is a painting of Caravaggio, done by Artemisia.
Hmm.
And here is the painting from which it is taken. And this is probably her most famous painting. And it is Judith saving Bethulia from the Babylonians by seducing and beheading their general, Holofernes, a subject Artemisia painted over and over in slightly differing versions, responding to the demands of patrons who all wanted a Holofernes from her.
Not to be funny or anything, but was there any live models used? Sorry.
Only briefly.
But she took it from Caravaggio, right? From that painting, because
Yes.
I will get on to that. It becomes kind of interesting.
it's very violent. I mean, I understand Caravaggio was a violent man, but
Yes, he was. He was definitely.
I don't think she was.
Yeah. I think this is, though, there's a lot of Judith and Holofernes. And I think that this is among the more violent of all of them. So in some of them, they're positively fastidious,
Yes, we'll get on to that too.
Yeah.
Okay, because, well, first, these are two self-portraits of Caravaggio, and the one on the left, the resemblance to Holofernes has been noted by many. They could be right. The portraits are separated in time, but not by much. Caravaggio died in 1610 at the age of 39. He was great friends with Artemisia's father, Orazio, and Artemisia, of course, knew him as well. The two men even spent time together in prison for the arrival of another artist named Baglioni and his wife. And we went into that and the scurrilous verses. Caravaggio, being a rough guy whose reputation for violence and other sins eventually got him excommunicated and exiled from Rome. The question is why Artemisia borrowed his face, if she did, and I think it's pretty clear, for the villain of her painting. There are a few possibilities. The painting is dated 1620, at which time Artemisia was 27 and Caravaggio was 10 years dead. Is it possible that before Caravaggio's exile in 1606, the 13 or 14-year-old Artemisia had a teenage crush on him, which he cherished? Is it possible that they had a brief relationship? Many girls were married by that time in Italy. If so, did she see his exile without him taking her along as an abandonment? Or did she resent Caravaggio's relationship with her father that had led Orazio into trouble time and time again? It's also possible that she'd heard one too many comparisons of her work with Caravaggio's. She was a mere woman, after all, and young at that. He was male and with an awesome reputation. A few well-meaning remarks like, wow, your painting's almost as good as Caravaggio's. Well, that would have done it for me, especially since that's Caravaggio's take on
No.
the same scene.
This is
Now-
actually what I had in mind. If you look at Judith's expression.
I look at her expression.
Ooh.
Now, don't get me wrong. Caravaggio was the most famous painter of his time, and he did a lot of amazing canvases, one of which we just saw. But this is not, to my mind, one of them. Let's
No.
look at the differences. Artemisia's Judith is putting the whole of her force into her shoulders, her arm, her back, into the murder. Caravaggio's looks as if Judith is doing a messy, disgusting job, like cutting up a raw chicken for dinner and holding herself away because she forgot her apron and doesn't want to get her dress dirty.
Right.
Judith's handmaiden in Artemisia's painting, if you remember, it was totally engaged in the murder, holding Holofernes down. Somebody had to, because he was a big guy and a warrior, and he is writhing in his death agonies. Let me just return for a second.
Yeah.
And we can also see how the other woman is helping in this.
Mhm.
Whereas in Caravaggio's work, the other character just fills up a space on the canvas and is watching something of which she looks rather disapproving. Now, negative criticism has been made of Artemisia's work because of the large fist of Holofernes. And this is attributed to the careless assemblage of, the three separate models done at different times. And I personally don't see that fist as that much bigger than Holofernes, than Judith's, because it should have been. I mean, he was a warrior. He spent his time holding swords and stuff like that, especially in his earlier life. And, your hands get bigger this way. And he was a big guy to start with. I'm defending my subject.
Jane, I have a couple of comment questions on chat. Just gonna keep
Okay.
it lively.
Sure.
One question I have from our Tiki, I'm sorry, I apologize. Question coming from Avra Cohen. Any discussion of Artemisia's rape and subsequent humiliation at a trial with compelled testimony under torture? How or to what extent this experience informs her art and her subject choices?
I will get to that as I go on, definitely.
Sorry, okay.
Any other ones?
There was more like a comment. We're discussing the Noah story here, but nothing as question presented. But I'll read them as they come.
Okay. Okay. Now, Artemisia must have known that her work was definitely better than Caravaggio's, but he was the one with the worldwide reputation. It must have been really painful to be dismissed because you were young and female. However, not as painful as owing your fame to a rape. Artemisia was spared this by being dead 300 years before it happened. In her lifetime, Artemisia's paintings earned royal commissions and they're all on their own merits, and she enjoyed enormous popularity as well as membership in a circle of international elites, including Galileo, whom she met in Florence and corresponded with. Almost nobody knew or cared about her childhood history. After her death, she was increasingly forgotten as the world moved on from the Baroque to the Rococo, which is the style of curlicues and cuddly cupids, and from thence, and about time, to the French Revolution. Around the middle of the 19th centuries, we women began to populate, other than as authors of high school textbooks, the hitherto male ranks of art historians. It was the heady time of Gloria Steinem and Betty Friedan, yay, and the Equal Rights Amendment that didn't pass, and National Organization of Women. And so female artists were searched for and given new attention. Artemisia was one of these. Somewhere along the way, the transcript of the trial of Agostino Tassi for her rape was discovered. Artemisia's story and her paintings, particularly the ones like Judith and Holofernes, fit perfectly into the feminist narrative. An abused woman was painting over and over, taking revenge on men who had abused them. She was reliving her trauma, wrenching at the revenge she'd been denied. I bought into this myself when I first researched this a few years ago, probably because her paintings on other subjects were just not available unless you could trail around to all the museums where they were. And they certainly weren't on the net that much. Now it's apparent that her work was far more diverse, and the repeated revenge theme paintings came about because her paintings of Judith and Holofernes, of Yael and Sisera, and Susanna and the Elders were wildly popular. Anybody wanted to have one of them recognizable as one of hers and commissioned her to paint one for them. So we go on. And we have been there and we have been there. And here we have Yael and Sisera. The story of them is basically the same as that of Judith and Holofernes, only this time the attacking army was Canaanite, and Yael put Sisera to sleep with a bowl of milk, which doesn't work that well, making the nap permanent by hammering a tent stake through his skull. As Artemisia grew up and showed precocious signs of artistic talent, she was given duties in her father's studio. For example, you couldn't buy colors at the local art store. You could get the ingredients for sale, but they had to be mixed. A demanding job because the color to be mixed each day had to match precisely the color used in the painting the days before. The ingredients themselves were expensive, and any waste would incur a dressing down or some other punishment. For example, there was one color that was known as Artemisia gold, which you can kind of see on this painting, and it's a little faded. And it was a famous feature of her later paintings. Its presence brought a higher price, but in her letters, she complained bitterly about the cost. Artemisia passed the worst years of her life between 1610 and 1612. Her mother had died when she was 12 years old. An older woman named Tuzia had been brought in by Orazio to help take care of her three brothers while she was working for her father in the studio. And this is Tassi. Among Orazio's friends was Agostino Tassi. He was a painter of considerable standing in Rome himself, despite a history including several well-deserved incarcerations. And you will read that variously that he was merely an assistant to the studio, or he was there to tutor her or something. But I'm going to show his work in about 10 seconds, so you'll be able to judge for yourself. In 1610, he was 32 years old and already had his own studio and a large number of patrons, not patients, woman. And so let's go on. Here's some of his work. And you can tell it's amazing, right? Here's another one. And you can see the mix of the seascape and the people, and all this architect is made up out of his head, doesn't exist. And here's a whole bunch of other ones that I'll leave up for a few minutes so you can look at them. There's a haunting mixture of stark but imposing architecture, mixed with landscape and seascape, dwarfing the tiny humans who inhabit this alien world. And the blend of this is called, it has a name, it's called Capriccio. If we look back at Artemisia's Venus, which she painted in 1626, and here we go. The picture in the upper left is a little reminiscent of Tassi's work, maybe, or maybe it's just a plain landscape. But if it was like Tassi's work, maybe one that she'd seen, is Venus dreaming of this? I would caution against reading too much into this one. Maybe Tassi left one of his canvases around the studio and she simply copied it. She didn't paint landscapes herself, at least none that I've ever seen. Tassi's morals and his resultant behavior didn't match his talent as an artist. In May of 1610, according to Artemisia, Tassi, taking advantage of Orazio's absence at the Feast of the Holy Cross, Tuccia admitted him to the house, where he pushed her into her room and locked them both inside. He then raped and abused her for several hours. Tuccia, well aware of what was going on, did nothing. According to Artemisia, she had been encouraging, Tuccia had been encouraging Tassi's advances for several months, most likely bribed by him. The artists who frequented each other's studios were a rough bunch, but Artemisia had moved very freely among them within the studio. Of course, you know, unmarried girls weren't supposed to be seen outside, except in church. She was devastated by the experience and the forcible loss of her virginity. But Tassi promised to marry her. She would have been unmarriageable otherwise. They continued the relationship while he kept postponing the actual wedding until it was discovered that he actually had a wife. The wife was among the missing, though. It was later established that he planned to kill her, and maybe he did. In any case, and in the absence of a body, as it would be today, nothing was done to investigate that possibility. Orazio sued Tassi for the damage to his daughter. He had Tuccia put in prison for her facilitation of the rape. The best account of what happened in May of 1610, when Artemisia was 17 or 18 years of age, is the record of her testimony of the trial that ensued. She underwent interrogation and torture to prove her innocence. The place of her inquisition was Orazio's house. The judge, Lord Roberto Bulgarello, asked her if she knew the reason for his questions. You know, I'm going to paraphrase what she said, but pretty much it's all her words. She replied that it was because of her father's activities, particularly the imprisonment of Tuccia, which Artemisia said was because she plotted to betray me by taking part in having me disgraced. I'm going to paraphrase this. You know, I shall relate in details the facts as they happened, she said. My father rented the apartment upstairs to Tuccia. My father was a close friend of Agostino Tassi, who began to visit the house frequently and become friends with Tuccia. She tried to persuade me that Agostino was a well-mannered man, courteous to women, and that we would get along very well. She pushed me so much that she convinced me to speak to Agostino, and he told me that a servant, Francesco, was spreading scandal about me, and Agostino would let me know what the man was saying. In my conversation with him, he told me that Francesco was boasting that I had given him what he wanted. I replied that it didn't matter what he said because I knew what I was and I was a virgin. She is here establishing an important legal point. Agostino knew she was a virgin when he raped her. Agostino left after this conversation, but returned the next day with another man, Cosimo, who at first urged Artemisia to have relations with Agostino. But when she refused, he said, "You've given it to so many, you could give it to him as well." A few days later, Tuzia persuaded Orazio to let her take Artemisia for a walk to a nearby church. Agostino and Cosimo were waiting at the door of the house, though, and Tuzia changed the destination to a vineyard. Artemisia was suspicious and refused, and instead they walked to San Giovanni up the street, but they were followed both ways by the two men. The same day, Artemisia continued her testimony. She was painting after lunch, and Agostino entered, grabbed the brushes and palette from her hands, and threw them around the room. Artemisia begged Tuzia to stay, but she left. Artemisia told Agostino she was ill with a fever. He replied that he had a worse fever than she did, and pushing her into the bedroom, proceeded with the rape. He held a hand over her mouth, and she was unable to cry out or scream. She said, "I scratched his face, and I pulled his hair, and before he penetrated me the second time, I grasped his organ so hard I pulled away a piece of flesh. When he was done and putting on his coat, I grasped a knife from the table and threw it at him, wounding him slightly." And this was also an important point, as it was recently in a similar trial here. She had protested his violation of her. Tassi promised to marry her and left. She ended, "With that promise, I felt calmness, and with that promise, I yielded lovingly many, many times." The interrogator asked her if she had bled from her private parts after the rape, and she answered that she'd had her period at that time, so she was unable to tell, but the blood seemed redder afterwards. And for any of you who have raised children, can you imagine a young girl going through this kind of thing? If the humiliation of this interrogation wasn't enough, there was far worse to come. The trial dragged on for several months. Agostino insisted that Artemisia was known throughout the neighborhood for promiscuity, and brought at least one witness to that effect. Tassi was imprisoned for a little bit of time, but neither side would budge. Eventually, the two were interrogated together at the house, just like Susanna and the elders. And cords were wrapped around Artemisia's fingers and tightened to the point where they might have broken those fragile bones and destroyed forever her ability to paint. She kept screaming, "It is true, it is true, it is true." And this time she was believed. No such torture was offered to Agostino. It is not clear whether the outcome of the trial, Agostino, brief imprisonment or exile from Rome, whichever lasted only a few months, was due to Artemisia's courage under torture, or a communication from Christina, Grand Duchess of Tuscany, whom Orazio had written and begged to intervene. She may have done, probably did. Orazio quickly arranged a marriage for Artemisia. The groom was Pier Antonio Sciatesi, also an artist, but one so insignificant that no record exists of any painting by him. He is memorialized only for being the spouse of Artemisia. He must have known what his role was to be, her manager and the rescuer of her reputation, and he seems to have loved her enough to have 4 children with her. Promote her work, take care of her financial affairs and the occasional lawsuit, and accept her later affairs of all kinds, unquestionably. Whatever pain, physical and otherwise, that Artemisia endured during her trial, and I call it hers because Tassi was the criminal, that pain went into her paintings and gained depth thereby. These are 2 extant versions of what became one of her most popular themes, Susanna and the Elders. The one on the left was painted in 1610 year of the rape, and the other is from 1622. Does anybody see any differences? So I won't have to talk about them. Come on. All right, here's my view. The story of Susanna is from the book of Daniel. Susanna is bathing in her garden and sends her maid to the house for ointments. Two elders of the temple, both judges, approach her and ask for sex. When she refuses, they tell her they will accuse her of adultery and she will suffer the death penalty. Susanna continues to refuse, voices are raised, and others join the scene. The next day, her trial was held at the house of Susanna and her husband, just as Artemisia's was. The judges swear that she was embracing a young man who fled at their approach. They demand that she be unveiled. One version of this says that she was stripped naked in the court. Susanna is found guilty and led off to be executed. She cries out to God, who sends Daniel to defend her. He demands that the judges be questioned separately about the details. Their versions don't match, and so she is just proven innocent. The accusers are the guilty ones. The parallels to Artemisia's story are obvious. The painting on the left, as I said, is from 1610. In the evil faces of the elders, we can read the lechery and conspiracy of Cosimo and Agostino. Susanna's public humiliation parallels Artemisia's ruthless interrogation. The menace is patent, but somehow the pose of Artemisia's first fails to convince me. If she had a talk balloon, it would probably say, "Get away from me, you disgusting creatures." And her gesture is completely ineffectual. You want her to get up and run. The second time around, on the right from 1622, to me, has more of the ring of truth. The sky isn't just cloudy. It is wildly threatening. Susanna is palpably afraid, too shocked and paralyzed by fear to scream or run. Perhaps praying that if she does nothing, the menacing elders will go away. You can even feel the fear in her face, in the tension of her body. Her legs are clamped together, which the other ones are obviously not. Artemisia kept painting the subject throughout her life, but the later versions are different from these early canvases. The last one is dated 1652, shortly before she died. The dark color is now popular, and I think that was due to the influence of Rembrandt. But more important, this Susanna shows defiance and strength. There is a direct line between her gaze and that of the men. Susanna is confronting her accusers. The Susanna paintings did wonders for Artemisia's career. Nobody beyond Rome knew anything about the rape, or if they knew, they didn't care. But it was common gossip there. So she and Pier Antonio left Rome as soon as they were married and took up residence in Florence, still very much a center of the world of art. Pier Antonio's family lived there, and the couple moved in with them while Pier Antonio organized a retrospective exhibit of her work. The exhibit attracted a fine crowd, including Cosimo II de' Medici, Grand Duke of Tuscany, and Galileo, who had been the Duke's tutor and was now his court mathematician, a salaried position that allowed him to research while exempting him from teaching. Both men attended the exhibit, along with many other notables from Florentine aristocracy. Despite the attendance of Pier Antonio's messy clan, with noisy kids included over Artemisia's protests, the exhibit produced a commission from the Grand Duke, a Judith and Holofernes to be newly painted for him, and a purchase of Woman Playing the Lute, which I think I have. Yes, that's his. There were a lot of women playing the lute by her, but this is the one from the Medici collection. Of course, other notables followed suit, and Artemisia's studio was securely established in Florence. The Grand Duke continued to order Artemisia's paintings, but eventually a rift developed as he stopped paying for them. There was a legal question about an advance he'd given her and his objection to the finished work. Another painting was paid for but not finished. Meanwhile, Orazio faced assorted problems in Rome. Tassi and his friends made life as difficult for him as possible in revenge for bringing the complaint against the rapist. Reports of Artemisia's successes in Florence were trickling in, along with invidious comments about Orazio's work compared to hers. One critic was quoted as simply saying, "He cannot draw." Well, I don't know. I think he could. What Orazio couldn't do was make a living in Rome anymore. Although he and Artemisia had been estranged since the trial and his hastily arranged marriage of her to a man she didn't love, he came to Florence. As a woman applying for membership in the Accademia di Disegno, she needed her father's permission. He needed a roof over his head and her connections. Her application, that of the only female to apply so far, was successful. In 1615, she was commissioned to contribute a painting to the ceiling of the Casa Buonarroti, which Michelangelo Buonarroti, the younger, was building as a tribute to his uncle, the famous one. This is the result. Each contribution, all from different artists, was to celebrate one of the characteristics of Michelangelo the Great. Artemisia's is a tribute to his innate gift. In 1618, Artemisia began an affair with Francesco Maria Maringhi, a wealthy Florentine who lives at the Palazzo Frescobaldi in the very best part of the city. Artemisia rented for herself an apartment on the Piazza Frescobaldi nearby the Palazzo. Stiatesi continued to marry her affairs, on which his own income was dependent. Artemisia had every reason in the world to have a place of her own. The Stiatesi clan, all of which lived with the couple, was large and noisy. Her spouse was reluctant to move, but there is no question, based on her letters, that she was romantically involved with Maringhi. He had asked that she address letters to him as Fortunio Fortuny, and this is one of them. Perhaps this was to deflect any curiosity of his wife if he had one. She isn't mentioned in the correspondence. I mean, a wife isn't mentioned in the correspondence to my knowledge. My heart, I have received from your lordship one of those letters that are my comfort and bring me back from death to life. And were you aware of the joy that I feel, I am sure that it's true that you love me, you would equally feel joy. Your lordship, please forgive me for the rest. If you're sensitive to this kind of thing, cover your ears. Tells me that you know no other woman besides your right hand, envied by me so much, for it possesses that which I cannot possess myself. And then you thank me for having offered you my house. Oh, my dear life, you do me wrong, as you know well that I am yours so long as I still draw breath. The only thing that destroys me is not seeing you near me, and rest assured that I await you as one awaits God's grace, that I'm resolved not to engage in that pursuit, except with you. And if you do not come, I will never, ever want to break my celibacy. But I leave you, my soul, to think about the state I am in. I cannot control my feelings in my heart when I receive letters from you. I have held fast so far, but find heart to take heart for the future. I would urge you with all my heart not to use that portrait of mine doing that impossible thing that, remember, you promised not to do, but which perhaps your lordship does. I would only remind you that it is a great sin, and I want you to remember that I love your soul as much as your body. So, my darling, thank me if you love me. Nothing more to say, and God preserve you on this day. Completely holy, your lordships, and Artemisia Lomi, that was part of her name. That letter is different from most of the others that have been found. Most of the letters contain pleas for cash. The Stiattesi's exit from Florence was untidy. The Grand Duke was becoming more and more impatient to receive a painting for which he'd given Artemisia a deposit of 50 scudi, and about which she makes excuse after excuse. The unreliable and expensive nude female models who were probably prostitutes, the need to repaint a section and so forth. She reminds him several times that the painting includes 8 human beings and 2 dogs. There was no question of returning the deposit. Partly due to Pier Antonio's excesses, the 2 of them were running out of money and drifting into debts they couldn't pay. Finally, they sneaked out of Florence, abandoning Artemisia's love nest and everything inside it. Back in Rome, both Artemisia and Pier Antonio importuned Maringhi to collect their possessions, for which they'd given him a power of attorney. But if they ever received anything, it isn't in the correspondence. And in a later letter, she mentions it's been sold. Maringhi became slow to answer letters, and despite his occasional assurances that he still loved her, it was obvious that he was cooling now that she was less convenient. Rome brought more sorrow. Artemisia's sole surviving boy, Cristoforo, died. His 3 brothers had died in infancy, possibly because of the plague that was still affecting Rome. Stiattesi wrote that he thought she would die herself. Artemisia's brothers were young men now, and they fought with her constantly, one of them even to the point of drawing a sword against her. Fortunately, Orazio stepped in and prevented the homicide. Maringhi was finding her constant demands oppressive. Still, she fainted. And I will spare you her next letter, which in part I read. She goes, it's to say, comfort of my life. I'm sorry you were put to such trouble on my account. I was unable to come to a solution such that my possessions did not have to be sold. But I have been left with nothing. I shall remain here living like a hermit. I now see that fortune has turned my back on me as she is robbing me of all things dear and useful to me. And for proof, consider that God has taken my son away from me. It is now 5 days since he died, and I have been dying of grief. It has occurred to me that the love your lordship felt so strongly for me is beginning to leave you. You only send me 2 lines. If you love me, it would never finish. Farewell. To my mind, that letter has a kind of strange ordering of the misfortunes. Cristoforo's death is cited, well, almost casually, compared to her loss of Maringhi's love and her possessions. Well, there had been precious little love in her life so far. In 1630, Artemisia put Rome and Florence behind her forever and joined the flourishing community of artists in Naples. For the first time, she collaborated on paintings with other artists, particularly Massimo Stanzione, who became a close personal friend, maybe more. She may have picked up the darker aura of her later works. That's good there. From him, here is one of their canvases. It's heavy on symbolism as well as darkness. Note the hand pointing to the sacrifice of the Lamb of God. Your trope for the crucifixion. The artists in Naples learned from one another, and Artemisia found enough commissions to live well as a single mother of a single child. She taught her daughter, named Prudencia for her mother, but called Palmira, to paint as well. She was even invited at last to paint for a religious institution and contributed the birth of St. John the Baptist to the hermitage of that saint. Orazio had been journeying also, finding what he probably thought would be a permanent home in the court of Charles I. Probably suggested by Orazio, Charles invited Artemisia to the court, and she joined him in 1638. Father and daughter had very little time together because Orazio died in the following year. She stayed on till 1642 and the start of the Civil War. when she returned to Naples in the sponsorship of the famous collector, Don Antonio Ruffo. And let us get to that. Ah, that's not Ruffo. I recognize him anywhere. Ruffo, a Sicilian politician of note, had a network of friends throughout Europe that surely must have been useful to Artemisia. He also commissioned a bunch of paintings, the most famous of which is Rembrandt's Aristotle, contemplating the bust of Homer, which you can now see at the Met. And so finally, here he is. Did she find love at last? Well, I hope so. She continued to paint until 1652. As I said, nobody's quite sure of when she died, and the paintings aren't reliable. And in 1656, there was plague again in Naples. This is one of her last canvases, dated 1651, and I just love it. Come on. And that's the end of my talk.
Mhm.
Any comments?
Thank you.
Okay.
Mm.
Well, if not, I shall depart and go try to soothe my throat.
Right.
Thank you, Jane. That was informative, and several people have put some further references in the chat.
Oh, I'd like to see that.
Yeah, can you bring up your chat?
Yep.
Okay, there's several of them.
Oh,
One's from the New Yorker, one's from the Guardian, and I think one is a reference to a meetup presentation.
oh, okay.
You know, let me unmute everybody. Jane, I'm sorry. Is there more? Or I can unmute everybody for comments.
Uh-huh.
Do you want me to unmute everybody for comments and questions? Jane,
What?
do you want me to unmute everybody?
Oh, is everybody muted? Oh,
Yeah,
please
yeah.
unmute.
Okay. Let me do that right now. Sorry.
Okay. Any comments now?
Ask all to unmute. I just did. So you can unmute yourself if you have a question. The best action is just to, to ask a question. We're kind of like a friendly group here. Just, be respectful, stuff like that. Go ahead.
Who, me? Make a question?
Avra had, she had a meetup presentation. What presentation is from, Ms. Cohen? Avra? Hello?
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 I am unmuted. I'm sorry. It's Mr.
Mr.
If it makes any difference. The posting was to this presentation.
Oh,
Okay.
I just added some references.
Oh, I see.
My initial comment was that Artemisia was the most important artist that no one has ever heard of.
yes.
I wouldn't say nobody, because obviously you're well familiar with her, but I had never heard of her. And I asked several people with a background in art history, graphic designers, people who you would think would know, who had never heard of her, and were quite amazed. Such a fascinating story and such fascinating work. So it was a brilliant presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Quick question, Abra. Why do you think that people would like, because they would know about Caravaggio and or the Renaissance? Is that why you think that way?
Well, the reason I think she's unknown is because the history of art has been written by men, and she has simply been dismissed, as many women in history have been erased.
Correct. I understand. Yep.
That's my opinion. Yeah.
As I've been telling Jane, we usually switcheroo between ancient powerful women to modern powerful women to Renaissance, and go back and forth. There was this one, obviously, we'll call her, let's just say, a powerful pharaoh wife, Hatshepsut. that I think her image has been erased from Egyptian due to her husband and her basically being reformers. But you could see like a lot of the faces have cheap noses, or complete faces are defaced, so to speak. So it could be both had to do with the fact that she was a lady, or has to do with the husband being reformist. So we don't really know. But in this case, you're absolutely correct. And like, go ahead.
I think that also it has to do with style. Caravaggio's name is inscribed in every art book and every art history class that you take. And, you know, that gives everybody a good idea of the period. And people don't want to see a lot of it. Orazio has also gone down the drain. His work is all over the place in various museums, but I'm sure even fewer people have heard of Artemisia Gentileschi as have heard of her. And he was really something in his day.
You could even say that if you look at the generation that came after Caravaggio, none of them really innovated. It would also be, say, the Carracci brothers, the Utrecht Caravaggio,
Yes.
the Caravaggios in France. And I think most people couldn't name any of them.
Yeah.
Because they didn't do something new. So the whole world looked like Caravaggio for the 50 years after he died. Every single painting. Georges de la Tour, for example, the Madeleine series. And so basically he blew up a bomb in the middle of art and he changed everything. Or perhaps he was just in the vanguard as everything changed.
Yes.
Now, as far as the paintings are concerned, why wouldn't we see like Dante's Inferno being painted by her in this regard, or the biblical images were the thing? I thought the Renaissance was more of a Renaissance type of thing, where it has to be more about not just biblical images, but the other ones as well. So
in terms of the Christian paintings, I mean, if you think of what the church was, it was a male-dominated, entirely patriarchal institution. So it would seem logical that the patriarchal or masculine point of view might be more appealing. I thought it was revealing when Jane said that a particular cardinal had some of the more lascivious paintings, or fleshly, shall we say, in his private collection.
Yeah. Well, I think that the same rule that applied to Andy Warhol applied to these artists is if you could shock and scandalize, you would become rich and famous, beginning with Caravaggio.
Right, but he scandalized from a male perspective, and Artemisia was, I thought she was pretty effective at conveying a more feminine perspective on the same stories.
You think the murders of Holofernes were feminine?
No, I think that she portrayed feminine rage in that case much better than Caravaggio did. Caravaggio, there was a certain passivity and a distancing of the women from the actual act. I think that what I mean by the feminine rage, the feeling, the anger about it came through in her perspective. And I think that my sense would be that that may have been off-putting to some men. Well, I mean, because part of the constant theme in many patriarchal cultures and belief systems is that the female is the dangerous one, and anything that reminds them of that, I think, would be a little off-putting.
Well, I think this was also against the background of Neoplatonism and the Renaissance, where the feminine principle was greatly valued.
Right, but I think you mean the feminine principle as perceived by men, as opposed to the feminine principle as experienced by women, is what the distinction I'm trying to make.
That may well be.
Yeah.
But
I don't know if I was saying it properly, but that's
I think you're being a little bit cynical in saying that for an artist to succeed in these days, he had to be an object of controversy. And Caravaggio is famous for having some of his paintings rejected because they were too lascivious. And that's just raised the price on the other ones.
Right, did you mean that, I didn't hear you well. Did you mean that I was being cynical?
No, I was.
Oh, okay, gotcha, all right. Yeah, I'm not as focused on that. I mean, I love some of Caravaggio's stuff, but I'm not necessarily all of it. But I definitely am aware of a very different emotional sensibility as I look at Artemisia's renderings.
I have one important question. The price of these paintings or prices of the paintings of Artemisia versus Caravaggio, how vary? I mean, how do they vary? Like I know there's this new application called Masterworks where people invest in future paintings, of famous artists. Does anybody know? Does it vary a lot because she's a woman, or it basically has the same type of valuable commodity? Anybody know?
I'm sorry, I really didn't quite understand what you were saying.
No, what is the cost? Like, for example, Mona Lisa, right? We know it's worth what? I don't know, gazillion dollars. Does paintings worth the same as Caravaggio's and other male artists in today's day, or they're not as valuable, so to speak, and maybe just what's worth 100,000 versus Caravaggio might be a couple of $1 million.
Yeah.
Well, I think I mentioned one, wasn't it? 2 million GBP.
Yeah.
2 million. Okay, got it. Sorry, I missed that. Apologies.
And so that would be, yeah.
And comparing also to Leonardo da Vinci, he also painted a lot on the dark type of background. And then, famously also painted with his fingers. Is there something we see she does, or she uses a paintbrush, oil? What is her style? I see that a lot of comparison to Leonardo da Vinci. I mean, do you see the same type of things?
Well, in her description of what happened when she was raped, she was painting with a palette and brush. And so I guess that was her usual. Of course, that was when she was, 17 years old, 17 years old. So, she may have gone on and done other things. But since I'm looking at the last painting, and it certainly doesn't look as if she did it with her fingers.
Okay. You can famously see Mona Lisa, the tips of Leonardo da Vinci, obviously people saying it could be the fact, was painting himself. I don't know.
Or a later artist would be Titian, who would be a much older contemporary. And he also, at the end of his life, began to do these almost expressionist paintings, which I imagine he could have painted with his fingers.
Do you think that might have been an eyesight thing, or just deliberately do that kind of thing?
Think about an expressionist painting, something from about 1900, 1920, 1930, that area. And think of the raw emotion that it gives, in part because it's so crude.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's actually a technique, and that various artists, including Da Vinci and Titian, stumbled across it. It's very far from being a photograph, but maybe that makes it even easier for the emotion to come through.
It's very interesting to me that emotion was so important in art, at least in this period. And today we have what I privately call boardroom art. And it's for corporations. And the whole point of it is that emotion should not be involved. I mean, you could look at it and feel something, but that's something you put in the canvas, not something the canvas gives to you.
Well, I think there's a whole range. I mean, you could take people like Georges Seurat, the pointilliste.
Yes. Yeah.
His figures are just emotionless, floating. And
Yes.
also Henri Rousseau.
I'm looking at silhouette and, like that, Jackson Pollock.
Yeah, but I mean, there are artists whose figures are not just emotionless, it's almost as if they're on drugs.
Yeah.
And that's an intentional choice of style.
Yeah.
Right, but don't you think with Seurat, the pointillist, I mean, to me, the style is what provides the energy, so it seems like they're
Yeah.
not competing with themselves within the painting.
Right, but the characters, they're the opposite. They're not moving, they're not going anywhere.
That's what I mean, rather
They're
than compete,
longer
rather
or-
than having the subjects of the painting compete with the technique of the painting, he seems to put the energy into the technique, and the characters are just floating in the technique. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
I want to use phrases like the characters is dissolving into light.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I guess, energy, light, same thing.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah,
Right. I think it's a brilliant technique, but it's kind of the opposite of somebody, like any expressionist from about 1920, where you have these crude, almost childlike drawings, but they're not. They're really very sophisticated.
yes, the body is kinetic.
Then you look more closely, and it's just raw energy.
Right, so
It's
the kinesis is in the figure versus the style of painting, and in like a Van Gogh or a Seurat, the kinesis would be in the style of painting as opposed to the figures.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think it's an intriguing question to ask as to, to what extent are we right in reading emotions into these paintings, and to what extent are these the paintings that were dictated by their time? I think Jane was saying that the Holofernes theme was really, really common. So that would suggest that many painters would be painting paintings like this.
Oh, no, I don't think I gave the wrong impression. It was, everybody wanted one of her Holofernes.
Her
You
Holofernes.
had to have an
Yes.
Artemisia.
Well, I think also another competitor would be Lorenzo Lotto did one that's really one of the more interesting.
Oh, I don't know that.
I think Titian did one, but I can't visualize it at the moment. So yeah, so these were like stock themes, and you might order one. Be fun. There's one art historian who went through all the bills of contracts for paintings of the 16th century, and developed a whole theory of art out of that. What were you paying for in these paintings? And
Oh,
it sounds like
interesting.
you were paying for Artemisia most of all, the hand of the artist.
Yes, I mean, I don't know. These names were known, and it would add to your prestige if you had one of them on the wall.
Yeah.
But are you saying too that are the themes themselves, like certain themes are more popular in addition to the artist, or are you not saying that?
Yeah, I mean, they'd even have names, like you can have an enunciation, but there's 4 different styles of enunciation
Exactly, okay, yeah,
in the Renaissance that were for different moments in the act, the interrogatio, the questioning, and so on.
yeah.
Yeah, and so it was a whole world. It's so hard to go back to it, to read a painting and look and say, well, this is a virgin and a martyr because of the symbols that you see here, and this symbolizes that, and this would be a natural thing for contemporaries.
Again, though, could that have been partly a function of the authoritative interpretations, and you would have 4 or 5, because this was during the period when different sects were beginning to develop. Would that have been a vision of the quote unquote patriarchs as opposed to the artists themselves?
Well, before going too far in that direction, I'd bring up Lucrezia Borgia, who ran one of the great humanist courts in Europe, and was an incredibly educated young woman, and later on a very, very educated duchess.
Right, but what school or what particular images would she have been most interested in, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
It's a very good question, I think.
Yeah,
and
I mean,
another-
what you're proposing, I think would make a good webinar.
Well, also Isabella d'Este is another contemporary of hers. She was the sister-in-law. And she ran the court of Ferrara at the point in time where it was the center of culture in Italy. And any artist who was anyone of any type, musician or whatever, wanted to be there. And, and these were female-dominated societies.
Well, it would make an interesting study, I think. I don't know enough about art to undertake that, but I think what you're proposing would be a fascinating study.
Yeah. Sorry.
Somebody's asking, what is the symbolism of the three roses?
Oh, roses are associated with the Virgin,
Oh, okay.
because there's also the three that the child is holding too.
I see.
And the three would be the Trinity, I would assume. I don't know for sure.
Trinity, right? The Son and Father and a ghost.
Yes,
I see.
I'm not positive. That's just a guess. But that the three, that would be the significance of the three, and the roses would be the association with the Virgin.
I see.
It's very interesting to compare Artemisia's trajectory with that of Sophonisba Anguissola, who was painting in the Spanish court within a few decades of this time. And she had originally painted the most lively and wonderful portraits of her family. I only know one of those, but I'm told the rest do like it. And then she came to Philip II's court, and it was all black and formality. And she was very much treasured there. And when she was finished, she had no affairs or anything like that. The king found her a nice sailor to marry, and that was her retirement. Completely different.
All right.
Now,
Interesting.
as far as Artemisia sustaining herself and being able to afford a living, did she make a living painting, or was was there any other means that I know that a lot of the painters, like for example, I mean, exception obviously there was a couple exceptions, like Leonardo da Vinci was paid by the French king a castle, and he lived there and never actually gave Mona Lisa to what's his name, the king of France.
Francois, the first Francois.
Yeah, Francois never gave him the painting and had the whole castle just for that purpose. Was she well off? Was she, able to afford a living, so to speak?
Well, that's a very interesting question, because she had many, many commissions and she was doing pretty well. But as far as living independently, I mean, she was living at her father's house, and then she was married and she was living at her in-laws' house. And then she struck out on her own. And most of her correspondence, I would say about 95% of it, wasn't love letters. And is complaining about how she needs money and how many expenses she had. On the other hand, her friends, and I put that in quotation, Ruffo and Marenghi, all of these guys were extremely wealthy. And of course, in those days, you didn't take up an affair like that and not scatter a little coin around.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, you think of it, the failed painter, Adolf H, what's not pronounce his name, was painting stamps in Vienna for tourists for a while, until he got rejected by So he claims a Jewish, I guess, counselors for the art university, and he, then he became obviously much angry at Jews, and that was the whole predicament of him, obviously. But there's other, obviously, he's sycophantic and schizophrenic human being. So I mean, I'm just saying, like, it's so her effect, you can see her effect on the art, obviously, the fact that what happened to her. So obviously it's interesting that artists always explore and express the misfortunes, so to speak, as they obviously it happens to them.
And I think there is an evolution too, as I went through with the Susannas, from formalism. This is the way you paint Susanna, to the elders, to the point where there was emotional content that must have been coming from her and her experiences.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions that anybody wants to ask, or any additions? If not, I just wanted to thank Jane. Thank you, Larry. Jane, particularly, incredible work of art. Thank you so much for presenting, talking about Artemisia. Just wanted to remind, please join our meetup YouTube channel for any updates. We might at some point will be meeting in person as well.
Nice.
Outside of being on Zoom as well. We initially 5-6 years ago met in person, and now Zoom kind of took off, and we do 2-3 presentations a week, so it's kind of difficult, but we'll do in-person presentation. Like, this would be a good fitting presentation to where is her art located? Do you know, Jane?
All over the place. The Met has one, but it's not an exhibit. I saw some of it at the Louvre. I don't know. You can look up where they are, and I think on there's a site will give it, but she's represented in almost every one of the very big museums.
Okay, so maybe what I want to do first, obviously, I want to do the Sassoon. I don't know if it's still around, but if not, then I want to do this one. I mean, I'll post it and see if there's any interest, maybe in July, to kind of go and check it out. Jane, you join Mohammed tours and other tours, so you kind of know, like, our thing at Metropolitan Museum, where where we go. So
Yeah,
that would be awesome. Yeah, and
Somebody's asking, Mary Christine is asking, when is the next one? I'm not sure if she means that when is Jane's next program, or when is the next History Mostly Ancient?
Jane, what would be the next topic?
well, I have to think of somebody. I mean, at this point, I'm scratching the bottom of the barrel, like Margaret Thatcher and Evita Peron, and I don't want to do them. The Rani of Jhansi, who seems like a good possibility, but I have to find out how much I can get on her.
Or we can go back to Cleopatra.
Oh, that's not bad at all. When I was in Egypt at this wonderful little hotel, they had a book there about Cleopatra. I resisted the impulse to steal it. But there is so much information because, of course, she was tied up with all these important Roman guys. So, everybody wrote about her. And so
talking about Cleopatra, actually, Howard is doing a presentation on Caesar and Cleopatra. And we called it, Did Cleopatra Have a Caesar's Child? So that will be at the end of this month. So do join us. And then, maybe stemming off that, we could just do Cleopatra alone.
I don't think I've gotten a notice on that, Zach. Have you sent the notices out on the Caesar one?
I'll tell you the dates exactly. Sorry if I didn't send the notice. It might have been June 24th. Yeah.
No, I haven't gotten a notice on that. I know I haven't.
I'll send it out again. I mean, we have a lot of good presentation. We have Templars, which was moved from last month to this one. Acceptance of knighthood, and then we're going to do Phoenicians, and Beverly's helping me with that. Particularly, I'm going to do the history of Phoenicians, and particularly the child sacrifices and all the weird stuff that they used to do. But we'll talk about the Phoenician alphabet and all that stuff. Hopefully, John Maloney would join us. He's taking a hiatus for a month or so until he's going to do another dead language. And
Oh, good, yeah,
You can probably talk him into it.
yeah.
Oh,
Those
please.
are fun. That it's a whole new perspective on a lot of things that you think you already know, but he tends to add elements that don't necessarily come in otherwise.
yes,
And Jane, I mean, you can possibly run out of women that are scandalously infamous, but I guarantee you that there's a whole treasure trove of women who are interesting that we haven't gotten to yet. I don't think we necessarily need the scandal, but
Valerie, sorry.
I like that.
yeah, I mean, I know that in some ways is like a titillating come on, but I mean, I know that there are many, really significant historical women that are well worth learning more about.
Yeah,
Oh,
you
well.
you could even do Gorbachev's wife, because he used to always say, "My wife and me," because she made all the decisions.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of them.
So there's there's gazillion.
Oh, and Mary Christine is suggesting Asian empresses.
We did actually. She did.
I thought so, yeah.
Jane, yeah, she did
Empress Wu.
Yeah.
Empress Wu, which was interesting one, but
So you should, Mary Christine, you should check on the YouTube channel. That it's probably there.
yeah, let me post it again so that people can. You know what? I've been starting to putting a little bit of a short video so that people know that, because sometimes people just don't go into long
Uh-huh.
presentations, and so I've been cutting them in little pieces and posting them a little bit, and so that people know where it is.
Mhm.
And because it kind of get an awareness out there. I mean, we have 100,000 subscribers, which is awesome, but and again, we're not about making money. We're just trying to get awareness out there, and
Ooh, and Everett just suggested Grace O'Malley, the Pirate Queen of Ireland, 1530 to 1603, is one of the most famous pirates of all time. From the age of 11, she forged a career in seafaring and piracy, and was considered a fierce leader at sea and a shrewd politician on land.
oh wow.
Did you take that down, Jane? Grace O'Malley. The Pirate Queen of Ireland, and her dates are 1530 to 1603.
Okay, I've got it down. One of the problems is you think you've got a wonderful subject because you hear something about it, and then you try to do the research, and there really isn't anything but
Yeah.
historical novels that are based on thin air.
In there, yeah.
Now, this lady got her start from the age of 11, Avra says.
Well, I'll
forged
look
a career.
into it.
If she kept the diary, yeah, things will go well.
Yeah, but you know what? What about Benazir Bhutto? Would be interesting.
Oh, yeah.
I would love to, like, it's a Muslim nation, and she was a woman, became a president.
And
Oh,
Golda
yeah.
Meir, of course.
Well,
Yeah.
oh, my area, exactly. So there's a lot of interesting,
Golda Meir is insufficiently scandalous.
Well, I just said we don't necessarily need the scandal.
I don't know. You
Oh,
decide.
Mr. Smith.
No pressure, no pressure. You can go back at any point in time. You can even choose a Neanderthal woman if there is, like Lucy, for example. I don't know.
Yes.
I don't know if she was a powerful woman, but it was just the first one.
I don't think Lucy had a diary, though.
Yeah,
Yeah, Lucy.
I think one person, Jane, have you considered Christine de Pizan?
I don't know the name.
Oh, you could arguably say she was the first feminist.
Ah,
She
yeah.
wrote books in defense of women against the prevailing male tradition of authorship and things like the Roman de la Rose.
How do you
She was
spell her last name?
Pizan.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, she was Venetian from a noble family, and she married into the French court, but her husband was a noble. And after he died, she had trouble getting money, so she began writing poems for hire, and then eventually wrote a wonderful book called The City of Women.
Hmm.
Oh, well, I should be able to find that.
Yep,
The book
sounds
was
fabulous.
of late-
How about, have you already done Eleanor of Aquitaine?
Oh, of course.
Yeah, I thought you might have, but I might have missed it.
We never did Olympia, did we?
No, which Olympia is this?
Okay, well, whichever one you want. you can choose either the poisonous one or not poisonous one, whichever one you want. I don't know.
Well, I was thinking and I have to do more research on it. There was a lady, I think her name was Isabel, and she was married about 4 times to various rulers of the Jerusalem state of the church that was at that time.
Hold on, why are we walking
Which
so
one
far?
there?
What about Bloody Mary or Elizabeth? There's like a gazillion of them.
Because I did those.
Oh yeah. Well, you did the same.
Shame on you. Okay.
Yes, Zach, you should
Yeah,
know.
but you
better.
never did the his first wife, Henry's first wife. What's her?
Catherine of
Catherine
Aragon,
of Aragon, yeah.
there's
Yeah.
not a lot to say about her.
Oh, maybe. You're right. I mean, it's mostly the squabbles, right? I guess.
Did
Yeah.
you consider Eleanor of Aquitaine? Was
Yeah.
that-
I've already done Eleanor of Aquitaine.
Yeah,
But
we
I
were just saying
think
that.
Isabel from the Outre-mer, I think I like her. She was married several times, and the scene is, there's definitely a lot on her. And the scene is attractive too.
Well, what about the last one I'm gonna offer, the Queen, English Queen that had Nicholas, George, and all three, and Kaiser as their grandkid, as
Victoria?
yeah, Victoria. So
Yeah.
all three, greatest, I mean, Nicholas not
Yeah,
greatest.
she was the progenitor of practically all of the European heads of state.
What
Right.
about, why don't we do her? I mean, not do her, I'm sorry, talk about her. That's terrible. She's
Good
Roll
thing there's
your
no
bread.
prudes in the group.
Looked at too many of the paintings.
I know that YouTube already told me that I can't monetize this now. Now that I haven't monetized anything, I was like, what the hell?
Okay,
Yeah.
goodbye all.
All right. Have a nice one. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for helping.
Yeah, Larry,
Bye-bye.
I really found you had a lot of interesting things to say. I appreciate everything you've offered, so thank you too.
That's fine. I sort of live over there. So
Thank you, Larry.
I visit a lot of churches and I'm not very religious. So
Yeah, but there's a lot of art.
I see a lot of paintings. So.
Exactly. All right, blessings all. Thank you all so much.
Thanks,